Hello out there and welcome to the Rocker Dog Podcast, the show that 9 times out of 10 talks to musicians about their dogs. This episode, however, is one of those exceptions. Our guest today, you can say, is a rock star in the field of philosophy. It's Professor Mark Rowlands, the chair of the philosophy department at the University of Miami and leading figure in the morality of animals. Mark just released his latest book in January entitled The Word of Dog, what our canine companions can teach us about living the good life. And this is his good life living, Rocker Dog.
My current dog is called Shadow. He's an East German working line shepherd, and he has the standard characteristics of that breed.
Which is?
He's very sweet. I mean, don't get me wrong, but he's also extraordinarily aggressive. Very, very hyper, always switched on, and very, very aggressive. Surprised me actually when I first acquired him.
Uh-huh. And is that an attribute for your lifestyle, would you say, or is it something you just kind of learned to deal with?
Oh, it's not an attribute. Well, I suppose it could be in certain circumstances. I mean, I travel a lot, and he's good protection for the rest of the family. But it's something I've learned. It's something I learned to deal with. Basically, I had to take various steps. What I ended up with was I tried to make him love contact, being hugged, things like that. So for the first 8 or 9 months he was here, I kind of slept on we both slept downstairs on the sofa, and he kind of grew to love it. When I say, okay, time for bed, he would jump up on the sofa and start kneading it like a cat, and it was an L-shaped sofa, so we would sleep head to head, and
Okay.
I'd wake up in the morning sometimes and his paws would be touching my head. It was very, very sweet. And so the ultimate result, I think, I mean, knock on wood, is that he loves me just enough that he's not going to kill me when I tell him to do things. It sort of shaped the way I came to think about sort of training, because I used to think of training, or making them sit down and lie down and stay and come and so on. But I think that's always got to be built on something more fundamental. And how much of that other something you need depends on the dog. But basically, we might call it love or something like that. He just has to love being in your presence, and then he will put up with things such as heel.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it seems he's comes from a long line of dogs before him. I just have notes of Hugo, Tess, Nina, and Brennan. And,
Yeah.
and is Brennan the wolf?
Brennan was a wolf hybrid. Yeah,
Okay,
he told him he's a wolf, but he was almost certainly a wolf hybrid.
okay. And how old, before I forget, how old is Shadow right now?
Shadow is 8 right now.
Okay. And tell me a little bit about your history with dogs. Is this something you grew up with? Like, did you grow up in a family that always had dogs or animals?
Yeah, we've had dogs, I think, since I turned about two or three maybe, and I had a few dogless years in my 20s when I was at college and things like that. But pretty much the whole of my life, I've been around dogs.
And of the dogs I mentioned, I saw, let's just see if there's any, standout attributes for any one of them. But I wanted to point out Hugo. You had mentioned in your current book, The Word of Dog, how, towards the end of his life, he was in pain. He couldn't stand. He couldn't, or he couldn't lie down. He really couldn't find any relief. Yet he could play fetch. And in that moment, it was almost like there was no pain anymore.
Yeah.
And that leads me, I kind of want to circle back a couple of things to the show. That leads me to a guest I had recently that we were talking about end of life care. And he mentioned that, it's better to be a day early than a day late. And you had mentioned that you felt you were a day late.
Yeah, it was unfortunate time because we knew the end was coming at some point in the not too distant future. But he really went downhill on Christmas Day, when I first noticed that he wasn't eating, and so we managed to get a vet to come around and euthanize him on the 27th.
Right.
Up until that point, we just gave him all the painkillers we had in the house and so on, and it was only the last day really where he was in too much pain to sort of lie down. The day that the vet came to
Right, right.
That's when the pain was really, really bad. But I took him, I thought, do you want to go out the yard to, say goodbye to it, basically, because the vet was on the way, and he did. And then he picked up his bite sleeve. And one thing about Hugo, he was a very sweet dog. He wasn't aggressive at all, but he did love a bite sleeve, and he used to throw me around outside like a rag doll when he was younger, and so he picked it up, and those days were gone. He didn't bite the sleeve anymore, but he did like to fetch it if I tossed it for him. And so he brought it over to me, and I tossed it for him, and he trotted off after it. And this kind of just escalated for a bit. And by the end, I was throwing the sleeve, and he was fetching it, almost like he wasn't dying. I almost called the vet and said, don't come. He seems to have got a lot better. But as soon as we stopped, the pain came back. He was just standing, and
Yeah.
the timing was the Christmas timing messed it up, and a day earlier would have been better.
Yeah. Another story that I came upon was the camping outside of Rome, where I guess you had your children at a water park. Your wife was left back with Hugo, and there was a situation where some sketchy characters showed up.
Yeah.
And luckily, Hugo's instincts showed up.
Yeah, they did, and Hugo wasn't an aggressive dog at all, but I think he understood what he was supposed to do. He understood what his duty was in some sense of understanding, and so he sat there, he stared at them, he growled, and in the end, that was enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
Luckily,
Great
that was
story.
enough. I mean, Shadow would have been there and just killed them all just to be on the safe side, sort of thing. But Hugo was a very different dog, but a wonderful dog.
Yeah. Well, in mentioning Tess and Nina and Brennan, how did I even come up with those three dogs? I know they were in the book, but I know we can't go down line through 15 dogs, but what
Right.
is about these five dogs?
Well, these are the dogs I've had as an adult.
Okay.
Uh, and I use the term adult loosely because I was a 27-year-old kind of man child basically when I first got Brennan the wolf. He was basically the dog I grew up with.
Hmm.
You never really grow up fully until you've experienced loss, and those sort of 10 years or so that he was with me, those were the years I grew up, culminating as there. So I wrote a book about it, sort of memoir, a philosophically oriented memoir called The Philosopher and the Wolf, which was about because I'd come to this conclusion that Brennan, in all sort of, in most important respects, was just much better than I was. And so in The Philosopher and the Wolf, I wanted to look at the stories we humans tell about why we're different from and better than other animals,
Hmm.
and undermine those stories. So I argue that each of these stories, when you sort of push it far enough, it reveals something deeply unflattering about us humans.
Yeah.
And so it was an attack on human exceptionalism, if you like.
Yes.
So Brennan was the impetus. When Brennan was 4, we moved from the US to Ireland, and back in those days, dogs had to go into quarantine. So Brennan went into quarantine for 6 months. It was tough on both of us. When he got out, I thought he needed a friend, with more legs than I had. So I acquired Nina, who was a German Shepherd Malamute mix, and then. A couple of years later, Brennan unilaterally increased the size of the pack on his own when he impregnated a white German Shepherd who lived down the road, and the result was Tess.
It's Tess.
And so the Philosopher and the Wolf was basically about those three animals with a focus on Brennan.
Okay.
Um, since then, the basic chronology of my life has been I moved from the US to Ireland with Brennan. Then we moved to England. We moved to France. Nina and Tess were there by then. Brennan died. Nina and Tess moved with me. They basically, when they were very old dogs, they retired to Miami, which is kind of thing. And they spent the last year or so of their lives here. And then when they died, my oldest son would have been about 8 months old. For his first birthday present, his birthday present,
Right.
I decided he needed a dog, and the result was Hugo, who was a very placid, lovely German Shepherd.
Sounds like a
After
perfect dog for just the
Yeah,
situation.
perfect. Yeah, I mean, he was so. I mean, Nina and Tess were great because I was a bit worried, right, about how the new because Nina was kind of ferocious, a bit
Mhm.
crotchety in her old age as well. Tess had very highly developed hunting instincts, so I was a little worried about how the new house sharing arrangements were going to work when my first son came along.
Yeah.
But in fact, they turned out to be better parents than me. I mean, if they followed him around everywhere, from room to room, wherever he went, they went, lay down next to him, and just and if he so much as squeaked in the middle of the night, then I'd have these two cold noses pressed in my face. Wake up, you negligent parent, like. Um, and so when they and Hugo basically carried on this theme. He'd follow my oldest son around everywhere.
That's great.
Once we thought we'd lost him. He managed to get, it was in the evening and somehow he managed to climb up onto a counter and get the keys to the back door. And we found them eventually after much panic, both out the backyard, just walking. But Hugo was a great dog. With Shadow, I mean, things unintentionally went in a somewhat different direction, but he's very rewarding too in his own way.
Yeah. Well, you've been described as a leading figure in the morality of animals, and
Right.
I'm curious, when did that interest start for you?
Yeah, there's two different things, right, that people can mean by morality of animals. So on the one hand, there's the old familiar kind of traditional, do animals have rights kind of thing? What's the moral
Hmm.
status of animals? And I've written about that sort of stuff. What I've been more interested in lately is a somewhat different question of whether animals can behave morally. And it was actually Nina and Tess, who first started me thinking about this, and Hugo, who sort of reinforced the lesson. When I had Nina and Tess's cold noses pressed up against my face because they're concerned about my son,
Yeah.
um, you have to think that there's something sort of, at least in the vicinity of morality going on there. They have some kind of moral outlook. And I wanted to explore what's required, what you need to be a moral being, something who can act for moral reasons. And spoiler alert. I mean, the basic conclusion was dogs can act morally because they act to the extent that they act on the basis of emotions that are about the welfare of someone else.
Right.
So with Nina and Tess, my son becomes distressed and they become distressed, but they can easily stop the distress by moving to another part of the house where they can't hear him anymore. But they don't do that. In fact, instead they engage in helping behavior. They try to get me to help, and so they're not just distressed because my son's distressed. They're distressed that he's distressed. And that I think is the basis of canine morality. It's emotions which are about the welfare of others.
Okay. Well, looking at your body of work, there were certain, funny enough, just certain titles kind of grabbed me, and just looking at the synopsis of many of them, going back over 20 years, Animals Like Us came out.
Yeah.
And that was kind of, described as the indifference of the consumer society on the suffering of animals. And I guess, for lack of a better description, you kind of put it that it's just simply unjust to harm animals, and animals have moral rights. And I'm curious, given your span of work and the 20 years, what have you seen? Where's progress been made?
I'm not sure any progress has been made, really. I mean, I think that there are attempts at progress. I mean, for example, when people, when there were bans were enacted on experimenting on animals for cosmetic purposes. So if
Hmm.
you're acting a project for cosmetic purposes, you shouldn't do you're banned from doing that. But I mean, as soon as you have some kind of advance like that, then people will find ways of undermining it. So you redefine what's cosmetic. So acne counts as a medical purpose, not a cosmetic one, because and that's just the way of the world. That's the way it goes. So we have these sort of seeming cases of progress, in the end of the day, more animals are experimented on than ever before.
It's terrible to hear. In asking that question, I was fearful that of your answer, that progress wasn't going to be made. And I immediately was going back to like, gosh, in the early 90s, it seemed like PETA was very instrumental in, no fur and cosmetic testing. But to your point, there's always a workaround when it's, and there's capitalism.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's just a sad reflection on the world, but it's the way things are, unfortunately.
Well, thank you for indulging me in that. I know, we're here to talk about your new book, which actually just came out on January 28th, and that is The Word of Dog, What Our Canine Companions Can Teach Us About Living a Good Life. And in the context of this show, I often ask my guests, what does the dog teach you? And more often than not, I get the answer, they don't sweat the small stuff.
Yeah,
They live in the present,
yeah,
and they kind of teach certain things about, I guess, unconditional love.
yeah, yeah.
So let's go down those three answers that I'm exposed to. Do dogs sweat the small stuff?
No, and that's the short answer. No, and the long answer is working out why. I mean, I think, right, if you gave some dog and some human, randomly selected dog and human, the kind of basic raw materials to live a good life, the dog would make a lot more of them than the human would. And part of the story, at the beginning of the story at least, is the dog's ability to take delight in the what we might call the marginally positive, right? So every day I'll, well, not every day, but most days I will drive across town to pick up my younger son from school. When I say to Shadow, "Do you want to come with?" He just explodes into this sort of expression of delight, running around the room, jumping up walls. He even manages to leash himself sometimes. He's this leash, he'll throw it up into the air and try and insert his head into it as it comes down. And he's an intelligent dog. He knows nothing much is going to happen on this trip. We're not going to a dog park. We're not going out for a run or anything like that. We're just going to drive across town. We're going to pick up my son and drive straight back. That is slightly better than staying in the house, maybe. So it's
Right.
marginally positive, but it's this ability to take delight in the marginally positive. And it's an important ability because so much of our lives are just marginally positive.
Mhm.
Not great, you know. So I always thought the key to living a happy, fulfilled life was having the ability to take delight in the marginally positive, which raises the question of why we humans can't do that or are not as good at it as.
Yeah.
So I suspect it's because of something that happened to us, you know, that didn't happen to dogs, and this sometimes goes by the name reflection. Okay, so
Yes.
reflection is the ability to think about yourself, about what you're doing, and why you're doing it. And we're good at this. We're the world heavyweight champions of reflection. Dogs, they don't do very much at all. And
Yeah.
once you can reflect on yourself, then it's like your life splits into two. There's the life that you live, but there's also the life that you think about, that you worry about, that you agonize over, that you judge. And so we have these two lives. We humans have these two lives, and the dog only has one. And I suspect that's why, you know, he loves his one life more than we love our two.
Part two.
Right.
Okay. Well, that kind of answers, do they live in the present? To your point, focusing on what's right in front of you.
I think they delight in the prey. I don't. I think because dogs they like to know what's coming next. It's one of the few sources of power they have in a world that we basically construct for them, right? But when I was living in France with Brennan, Nina, and Tess, we do the same thing every day. You know, I'd write for a few hours, then we'd walk down to the beach, then we walk over to the bakery, the boulangerie, and buy some stuff to eat. You know, and they knew exactly what was coming, just like Shadow knows exactly what's coming at a certain point in the day when I'm going to go and pick up my son from school. So they can anticipate the future. You know, no question about it. They also have very, I think, pretty good recollections of the past. I mean, that's what all both anecdotal and more scientific studies seem to indicate that dogs have pretty good episodic memory, memory of past episodes. It's not that they're condemned to live in the moment like some sort of goldfish or anything like
Right,
that.
right.
I think that's unfair to goldfishes too, as far as I know, actually. But you know, the proverbial goldfish who has a 15-second space, they're not like that at all, right? They can anticipate the future, they can remember the past, but they delight in the moments in ways that we, I think, have lost.
Okay. And I should clarify, this is me projecting to you. I didn't take it out of your book.
Right.
I took
No,
it out
no,
of my experience with my guests. So I want to make that clear for the people that are listening. What I didn't want to do is lead you into certain things that I had read in your book. I was going to take some of my experience and my guest experience and see how they may or may not have fit into your book.
yeah. No,
So just to
I
clarify,
mean,
you're not saying, your book didn't state, the dogs live in the present or, don't live.
no, it is a common because this came up with the philosopher and the wolf as well, and people say, oh yeah, well, so it's all about living in the moment, and I'm not sure I even believe in the moment. I think the moment is just an abstraction between
Yeah.
recollections of the past and anticipations of the future. So it's not that dogs live in this unreal thing anyway. It's that they take delight in things that are going on in the present that
Yeah.
we lost. Yeah.
So lastly, in my projecting to you onto your book, loving unconditionally, what do you make of that? Is there any proof to that? Or is there any weight to
No,
that? Or is that just a hopeful thing that we project on our dogs?
no. I mean, if you treat a dog badly, you can make it. I mean, I take it this is no one's going to question it. If you treat a dog badly, you can make it into a vicious dog, for example, an aggressive dog. Um, so I don't think love is. I think they're a lot more forgiving. They
Yes.
forgive us our trespasses, right? Much more. We're far less forgiving as a species, I think, than dogs. So they can overlook a lot. I don't think that arises to the level of unconditional love, but it's certainly a much more patient love, if you like.
Now, your dogs have seem to have inspired so much of your work. Is it dogs specifically, or can you give credit to the animals of the earth or certain animals?
It's dogs because those are the animals I've spent all my time with. If I was a cat person, then cats might have played a similar sort of role. But it just so happens that I've spent most of my life with dogs, and I think it's difficult in the end not to pick up a thing or two from them if you spend that much time with them. If you and you remain, somewhat open to what they can teach you, then it's difficult not to pick up various lessons in the end. That's basically what I picked up.
Okay. Sorry to cut you off. I was just going to say I warned you this was coming to wrap things up. I do something called the Zoomies, and it's
Right.
five frivolous questions. These are geared towards musicians. I'll massage them a little for you. This one's geared to anybody, but this is question one. Do you allow the dogs to lick your face?
Yes.
Okay. Question two. This is very musician oriented, but anybody can answer it. Let's use Shadow. Does Shadow have a theme song? Like when Shadow comes walking into the room, what music should be playing?
That's a good one. It depends what mood he's in, basically. I mean, if he has just leashed himself because he knows we're going out for a walk or run or even to get my son from school, Beethoven's Emperor Concerto, third movement.
How's that one going? I would only know classical by hearing it.
Basically he's strutting.
Okay. Question three. Who would Shadow want an endorsement from?
Some company that dispenses the kind of food that I don't eat. So if you could find a company that specialized in steaks, for example, then I'm sure that's what he would go with.
So is he basically a vegetarian as well?
Not with Shadow. I mean, I have with other dogs. Shadow has skin issues, and I haven't been able to find a vegetarian food that doesn't produce those issues. So he's
Okay.
not.
Question four is, do you have a dog voice? Do you speak
No,
to your dogs in a certain? Okay, so you
no.
speak to them peer to peer.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, and you never channel a voice. You never imagine what Shadow would sound like humanized.
No.
Okay. All right, and then last but not least, I simply ask guests if they'd like to give a shout out to anybody that does good for dogs, whether it's a shelter or a trainer or a groomer.
No, I mean, Shadow would kill any groomer who I mean,
We thought
invasion of his
of,
personal, he has a certain personal space, which is quite large, and no one gets in that space.
okay. Well, good luck with the new book, The Word of Dog. Thank you for coming on the show. I know it's a little different for you. It was a little different for me, given you're not a touring musician. But I appreciate you giving me your time because I knew you'd give me some unique viewpoints. So thank you.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me on your show.